let's go ahead and get started. Wait for the screen to warm up here. Your next assignment's due on Wednesday, homework number 8, and today we're going to get into benefit cost analysis, which is a component of what you'll see on that assignment. The first problem is related to the incremental analysis that we did in class on Monday. Remember that we don't have any class on Friday this week because of October break. You've got vacation tomorrow and Friday. I guess the university is still open, but we don't have classes held. So any questions related to the announcements? If you're following along in the textbook, we're going to be moving into Chapter 9 now with the benefit cost analysis. It's kind of a new phase of the course where we don't focus quite so much on profitability and are looking at other techniques for analyzing opportunities and comparing alternatives when things other than maximizing profit are the objective. So that's what we've been looking at so far, basically, is how can you make it so that your company is squeezing every last dollar that's possible out of its operations. And so minimizing expenses, for mutually exclusive alternatives, trying to find out which one of them is going to yield the most profit. And obviously money is important. It's a tool that you can use for solving problems, and when you're in a company, it's your duty to try and put the benefits of the shareholders really high on the list of what you're trying to achieve. But there's more to life than just maximizing profits. And in fact, there are a lot of things worth doing that don't generate any kind of return whatsoever. So an example of that is disaster relief. I'm sure all of you are aware that there was a big hurricane and flooding that happened down in eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina. And so right now, millions of dollars is going to alleviate the damage of flooding that's occurred, and people are donating money for heaters and generators, and across the world people donate whenever there's a famine and to relieve suffering, but they don't get any cash back for that. And so there has to be, it would suggest the fact that people are doing that, there has to be some motivation other than maximizing profit for certain activities. And so another example of something which is an expenditure but doesn't necessarily maximize profit are improvements to highways that are meant to improve safety. So a metal guardrail is very costly to put alongside a road. It's expensive, not just in terms of the materials, but also the installation, and even the upkeep is pretty costly. But they do it because they recognize that the loss of a human life at a location where a car driving off the side of the road would be especially dangerous. They're trying to mitigate that, and somewhere along the line they decided that spending money to improve safety and reduce the risk of accidents and deaths is a worthwhile investment. Anybody recognize what this is or know what we're looking at in this picture on the bottom left? Well, I heard somebody whisper it very quietly.
Is that right? Sound barrier?
That's right. It's a sound barrier. So you'll notice it's alongside a freeway and there's big heavy trucks going past. What would be the motivation for installing a fence like this alongside a freeway? Yeah, it could be that on the other side of the fence, people are living. And so it's very costly to put in a noise wall, but it improves the quality of life for the people on the other side. Now, think about the types of analyses that we've done before, making cash flow diagrams. It would be pretty easy to have the outflow quantified for a noise barrier because, we could get an estimate of the construction costs. But the people that live on the other side of this noise barrier, they're not paying for the installation of the wall, and it's not like a recurring expense that they're paying. And so we wouldn't be able to use the traditional methods of rate of return analysis or incremental analysis. Like, those techniques would fall flat if we're trying to evaluate whether or not an improvement like this is suitable. We think about decision criteria that we've used so far. We've had decision criteria, things like if the internal rate of return is greater than the MAR, then the project is potentially acceptable. And it may be that the organization that put in the sound wall, they might have a MAR, but there isn't going to be a rate of return for this. There's just only going to be cost. It's a cost-only alternative. The same thing is true, for example, of efforts to clean up environmental pollution. There are expenses, but seldom, if ever, would there be revenue that gets generated when money is spent to try and clean up a lake. The lake doesn't pay back the people who get the garbage out of the lake. So people must do it for other reasons, and we have to have some techniques to determine whether or not a project is justifiable or not. We need some sort of a screening tool to give the thumbs up or the thumbs down, because obviously you have to draw the line somewhere. Like, for example, this steel road barrier. Well, they could hire people to stand alongside the road and wave their arms to make it even more obvious that you're in a danger zone. 24 hours a day, there could be people there that are just meant to wave. That wouldn't, and it's obviously ridiculous, but if you back away from that, there's some threshold, some like breakpoint line where the improvements are no longer justified. Even though you say you're doing it for safety, there has to be a limit. Sometimes people will think that as long as there's a good underlying rationale, then that means that the spending will be unlimited. Like national security. As long as somebody just says the word national security, then you can justify any expense no matter what. But that's not necessarily true, because if you spend all of the money just on national security, then there isn't money left over for other things. So it's not always just about the money, but we still need to have some tools for comparing alternatives and screening to determine whether projects are suitable. The COVID-19 pandemic was another example of like people talking about, there was a lot of death and economic loss, but then because everybody was just kind of making up as they went along, there was also a lot of hysteria and overspending and wasted money. And so it's hard to know in a crisis whether expenses are justified, but there are still some tools that we can use to try and bring some order and sensibility to decision making when the options aren't going to yield a profit. So in order to do that, we have to look at what makes public sector projects unique. And so here's a whole host of different types of spending that are typically owned by governments or financed by governments. Sometimes they're owned by special corporations that exist strictly just to develop and operate a large public sector project. So for example, airports can very often be incorporated into some sort of an organization that is maybe jointly managed between a county, a city, and even state entities can get involved. Like, for example, the Port Authority of New York. It's kind of a standalone entity, but it operates a lot of the airports and transportation systems in the New York area. And so these are all projects that share some common characteristics, like they're very expensive in many cases, and it could be that if they do generate revenue, it's over a very long time frame. And so airports charge landing fees to aircraft, and the passengers who use airports have to pay facility fees. But an airport costs billions of dollars to construct, and it may be 20, 30, or even a longer number of years before enough revenue comes back to justify a project like that. So public sector projects are sometimes financed by the government because individual companies wouldn't have enough money or resources to initiate the project on their own. Some of these projects don't generate any revenue, or the revenue is so minuscule that it would never cover the cost of even operations. And so think about parks and recreation. Here in Huntington, we have some pretty nice parks. Ritter Park is, very lovely. It's a place you can go to run, have picnics. It's kind of a bright spot in Huntington, but you don't pay anything to go there. They don't charge admission fees. They don't even check to see if you're a resident of Huntington to go and enjoy that park. People from all around can go and make use of it, but there's no revenue coming in. So the purpose isn't to generate a profit, but the purpose of projects like these is to provide some sort of a service to the citizens of the area. And so the service might be disease prevention in the case of like sanitation projects like garbage collection or sewers, water treatment. And so avoiding disease is always a good investment. It could be that the service is economic development in the case of highways and bridges and airports. Those sorts of things can stimulate the economic growth in an area. So some sort of a service, but no profit is being generated. So here's a table that compares and contrasts the private sector projects that we've been analyzing so far to public sector projects, which is what we're going to be focusing on for the next several lectures. And so whereas private sector projects are sometimes done with a little bit of money, medium amount of money, sometimes large projects, public sector projects are usually large or very large and longer term. And that is just kind of by default. Public sector projects are done because they're necessary, but companies don't want to do them. For-profit companies have no interest in developing Ritter Park and buying a bunch of land and maintaining it because it doesn't help their bottom line, it doesn't return profits to their shareholders, and it's not their mission. And so if we want things like that, then it's up to the public sector, meaning municipalities and governments, to take those sorts of tasks on. And one of the biggest differences between private and public sector projects is the way that we give the thumbs up to the project, the selection criteria. In selection criteria for a private sector project, it's just the rate of return. So if the rate of return is greater than the minimum, then we'll undertake a project. But in the case of a public sector project, multiple criteria means that it's as much of a political process as an economic process deciding whether or not to do a project. So they're looking at multiple stakeholders, people who are going to be using the facility, people who their businesses would benefit from the facility, taxpayers have a voice in the decision-making process. And so how to know whether or not a public sector project should be undertaken is very rarely a simple process. And so there's a lot of different people who get involved in the analysis and decision-making. And so public sector projects are usually a lot slower to be undertaken. They'll be analyzed and publicized and discussed for a long time before people finally give them the green light and it starts to proceed. The interest rate for public sector projects is generally lower when they're borrowing money. When a government borrows money, they can usually get access to capital at lower rates than companies can borrow money for. And the reason for that is that companies have customers who pay for their services, but they can't force customers to buy their services. They don't have like a guaranteed economic base in the same way that governments do, because governments have the legal right to tax their citizens and tax people who are set up in their locality. And so because they have a more firm financial foundation, generally public sector projects can be financed with a lower interest rate than for-profit companies can borrow money at. So the interest rate difference is significant, but just because the government can borrow money at a low rate doesn't necessarily mean it's free money. So we have to keep in mind that a public sector project, it's not magic money. It's like money that's been taken from taxpayers in order to finance, for example, the I-64 highway improvements. If you drive on the interstate, I'm sure you've noticed, it seems like for the last several years it's been under construction, and it's not being built with free money. It's being built with money that eventually is going to have to be paid off, and so you don't want to overdo it in a public sector project. You want to only build what's justifiable and what's sufficient for the need that's there, but excessive waste is harmful to the economy because that's money that could have been left in private hands and spent more efficiently. Okay, so these public sector projects are good, but how do we quantify how good they are? For example, if you're putting in extra lanes on the freeway because you want to alleviate congestion, how do you quantify the dollar value of alleviating congestion? Think about times that you've sat in traffic and what a downer that is, to just waste your time, especially when you've got somewhere else you need to be, you're feeling like you're in a rush. In order to analyze public sector projects, sometimes we have to assign a dollar value to the improvements that they bring. So for example, these people who are sitting in traffic, what if they were willing to pay $10 an hour to not sit in traffic? For example, if you had a commute every week and your commute was 5 hours, but 2 of those hours were just sitting stalled in traffic in congestion, how much would you pay to take your 5-hour commute down to 3 hours and eliminate that congestion completely? So there are economists out there who do analyses like this to find out what is the economic value of reduced congestion. Or an economist may look at what's the economic value of improved public health. Like if people are less sick because maybe the dust in the air isn't aggravating their allergies and their asthma as much. So if you bring the particulate pollution down, people are sick less often, they go to work more, they don't feel as bad. It seems like a pretty murky thing where you're trying to put a dollar value on what it's worth not to feel sick for a couple of days. But there are people who specialize in that, trying to quantify in dollar terms the benefits of public sector projects. So they look at recreational opportunities, like someone who has the ability to go fly fishing because of a new dam that's being put in and how it enhances the habitat for fish downstream. They'll look at if new construction techniques are implemented to reduce vibrations and noise and pollution and dust, how much is that worth to implement these new construction techniques compared to the old construction techniques? Now, we don't have to worry about how they do it, but just take it as a given that there are people out there who specialize and do this analysis of turning benefits into a dollar value. So it's not actually that the people are necessarily paying it, but they would pay it, or their time is inherently worth something. So they assign a dollar value to the benefits of public sector projects. So this idea is that you can monetize each effect of the project, both the good and the bad. So projects have costs, which is an outflow that you're spending to construct the project, but there are also a separate category of consequences that are known as disbenefits. So benefits are obvious. Those are the advantages, like the motivations of why you built the project, but sometimes the disbenefits are less clear. The disbenefits of a project could be the delay that occurs when the construction process is going on. So think about Hal Greer and like how messed up that road is if you've driven on it recently. Especially when it was under more active construction than it is now. It was just an absolute nightmare. And so I don't know whether or not they analyzed that project before they moved forward with it, but if they did, one of the things that they ought to have considered would be the disadvantages to the public that occurs during the construction process, like the delay that happens during construction, or if there are businesses who are negatively impacted by the congestion, by having heavy equipment block the entryway into their business. And for some of them, there may be like less driving traffic going past a certain business than there was in the past. And so disbenefits are just all of the negative consequences of a project that we have to consider in order to have a whole picture of its suitability. The costs of these three, the costs are the easiest to quantify because those are actual outflows of real dollars, but the benefits and the disbenefits aren't necessarily real dollars. Sometimes it is. You know, we can lump in together like the increased revenue that a city would get if they have airport improvements. Like that could be like real money that comes to the businesses in an area in the future. Although we're estimating in the future, that is actual money. But some of these are monetized benefits, like time savings. It's not actually that money is changing hands. We just assign a dollar value to the time that a project is saving for the people who are affected. Or if we're talking about safety. So think about there's an intersection, 20th Street and maybe like 9th Avenue. I've driven past that intersection a couple of times and seen wrecks at that intersection, and it's just after cars come up from underneath the like the railroad underpass, and I think it's like poor visibility there, and I've seen wrecks on multiple times, and I'm hardly ever over there, but it seems like on the few occasions I drive through there, I've seen wrecks. And so if they somehow did a project to improve the visibility and enhanced safety, it's not like there's any way to collect money from people who would have been in a wreck, but now they're not in a wreck. Their insurance company isn't going to pay for those improvements, but we can still, on a statistical basis, look at the data of how many accidents there were in the past, and then estimate in the future how many fewer accidents there will be, and assign a dollar value to it. So in the benefits and the disbenefits, it's a mix of actual benefits that have a monetized value, and then some of them that are just hypothetical. But what we still do is combine them together and find out whether the benefits outweigh the costs. That's basically the analysis, is do you have more benefit than cost? Because if you don't, if the costs outweigh the benefits, then you shouldn't do a project. You should only do a project if the benefits are greater than the cost. But in order to combine the money together, of course, it needs to all be in the same time frame. So it all needs to either be at the present or in the future or expressed in terms of an annual worth. And in the formula I'm going to show you, you don't put minus sign for costs. Costs are already known to be outflows in the formula. So the minus sign is built into the equation for costs. And then if a certain project is going to reduce expenditures by the government, then those are subtracted from the cost. So here is the benefit cost ratio. I told you earlier that if the benefits outweigh the costs, then you should accept a project. And that's the decision criteria for this benefit cost analysis. We say if the ratio is greater than or equal to 1. So look at what is in that ratio. It's saying the benefits minus the disbenefits are in the numerator, and then the denominator are the costs, both the initial construction costs plus the maintenance and operation costs. And so typically the initial costs will already be at the present, but then the maintenance and operation, the benefits and the disbenefits, those are in the future. So they have to be discounted to the present before they're put into this ratio and combined together. So if the benefits outweigh the costs, then the project is suitable. If they don't, then the project should be rejected. This is the conventional B2C ratio, which is what we'll mostly use this semester. There's also what's called a modified benefit cost ratio, where the maintenance and operation costs are put into the numerator rather than the denominator. It's just another way philosophically of looking at the projects, which is to say that you want on an annual basis the benefits to exceed the annual maintenance and operation costs as well. So it seems simple, but a lot of problems can be avoided if you analyze things this way. think about public spending. Like, for example, the new cybersecurity building that's being built on Hal Greer. I think they're going to spend like $25 million on that building. The question is, are the benefits of that building outweighing the $25 million of initial construction costs plus maintenance and operation? So they're going to have custodians, electricity, water, utilities, like it's going to be expensive to have that facility. Did they do a B2C ratio analysis? Probably not, honestly. But they should have. Anytime public money is spent, they should analyze the B2C ratio to determine whether the benefits outweigh the costs. So let's get some practice with that. This is the handout for today, the in-class exercise. And on the back side of the paper is the 4% table. Because in this project we assume that we're borrowing money at 4%. Okay, so what you're going to need to do is read through this and determine what are the costs, what are the benefits, what are the disbenefits, and then convert them all to the present value. And then calculate the conventional and the modified B2C ratio. Okay, so the initial cost, the initial construction costs of $4 million now, $18 million each year, 1 through 4, and then $4 million in year 5. You'll notice on the whiteboard I also wrote the same thing where we're doing a find P given A for the $18 million each year, and then find P given F for that final $4 million lump sum 5 years in the future. So the cumulative initial costs taken to the present are $72.6 million. The maintenance and operation costs discounted to the present are $13.59 million because there are 20 outflows of $1 million each, and then the factor, the P/A factor for 20 years at 4%, 13.59. And if we discount all the benefits to the present, the benefits that are described are annual revenue and benefits of $3 million in years 1 through 10, and then $5 million in years 11 through 20. So for the benefits, I'm taking finding the present value of the $3 million, but then the $5 million have to do it as 2 steps because it's in years 11 through 20. So finding a lump sum value of it with a find P given A, then you have to multiply that by find P given F. So if you were to draw a cash flow diagram of it, what you'd see is that you're consolidating the annual series to a lump sum at year 10, and then you have to discount it from year 10 to the present with this final factor. So the benefits should be $51.7 million. And then the disbenefits are described as being a loss of business income during construction. So $10 million during year 1, $5 million during year 2, and $2 million year 3. So all those have to be discounted to the present, and collectively they're worth $16.01 million. So I asked you to calculate both the conventional benefit cost and the modified. So the conventional is that we'll take the the benefits and subtract the disbenefits in the numerator, and then put all of the costs in the denominator. So the initial costs plus the maintenance and operation cost. So the ratio is less than 1. So the conclusion here is that this new highway that's described is not suitable for construction. It should not be undertaken because for every dollar of cost, it's only delivering 41 cents of benefits. 41 cents of net benefits. You know, net benefits, I mean by that is if we subtract out the cost of the disbenefits from the benefits. So a ratio, you can think of it as how many dollars or cents of benefits are being delivered for every dollar of cost. So if the denominator is 1, then the numerator of the ratio represents how much value is being delivered for every dollar. So this, it's like you're spending $1, but you're only getting 41 cents back. So it's not a good investment. And the picture doesn't look any more favorable when we consider the modified benefit cost ratio. The modified benefit cost ratio is also below 1. So this is not an acceptable project according to either one of the techniques. So this project should be rejected. So this is the first of several different tools that we're going to talk about in the coming class periods just to analyze public sector projects. We're not analyzing it for its profitability, but we are looking at the economic impact of the money that's spent. So that's it for today. Remember that the homework assignment is due a week from today, and we have no class on Friday. So I'll see you next Monday.